Me and my friends used to go to this park, and when this incident took place, it was one of the hottest days of the year. In fact, I think there was a hot weather advisory or something. The sun was relentless, beating down on us as we sat on the swings, trying to find some relief in the shade of an old oak tree. The park was usually a place of laughter and joy, but today it felt eerie, as if something dark lurked just beyond our sight. I remember the day vividly. It was the summer before we all went off to college, a last hurrah of sorts. The park was unusually quiet, the only sound the creaking of the swings as we pushed each other back and forth. We were discussing our plans for the future, the excitement of new adventures mixed with the bittersweet feeling of leaving our childhood behind. As the sun began to set, the heat became almost unbearable. We decided to explore the park a bit more, hoping to find a cooler spot. That's when we stumbled upon the old playground. It had been abandoned years ago, the equipment rusted and worn. It was a place of our childhood memories, but now it felt haunted, a shadow of its former self. We wandered through the playground, the heat making our movements sluggish. That's when we heard it, a soft whispering that seemed to come from all around us. We looked at each other, fear creeping into our eyes. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if they were trying to tell us something. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure, barely visible in the fading light, standing at the edge of the playground. It was tall and gaunt, its eyes burning with an unnatural fire. It seemed to be watching us, waiting for something. We tried to run, but our legs felt heavy, as if the heat had drained all our energy. The figure moved closer, its footsteps echoing in the silence. We could feel its presence, a chill that cut through the heat, a darkness that threatened to consume us. After this happened, we never spoke of that day again, not to each other, and not to anyone else. The park was also never the same, and neither were we. The heat of that day had left its mark, a scar that would never heal. And the figure, the thing that had watched us from the shadows, it had left its mark too. It served as a reminder that some secrets are best left buried, and some memories best forgotten. When I was a kid, my parents would stop off at random parks during cross-country road trips. It was a way to break up the monotony of the long drives, and it gave us a chance to stretch our legs and explore new places. Most of the time these stops were uneventful, just a quick run around the playground or a picnic lunch under a shady tree. But there was one park, and one stop, that was different. It was a small park, tucked away in a quiet corner of a small town we were passing through. The sun was setting as we pulled into the parking lot, casting long shadows across the playground. The park was deserted, not a single soul in sight. My parents shrugged it off, thinking it was just the time of day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about the place. I remember the chill that ran down my spine as we walked through the park. It was quiet, too quiet. The swings creaked in the breeze, and the slides seemed to loom larger than life. I couldn't help but feel like we were being watched, like there were eyes in the shadows, following our every move. As we made our way back to the car, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A figure, standing at the edge of the playground. It was tall and thin, almost skeletal, and it seemed to be staring right at us. I blinked and it was gone, but the chill in my bones remained. I never told my parents about what I saw that day. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. But I've also never forgotten that park, or the figure that watched us from the shadows. And to this day, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed just a little bit longer. Did the town where you grew up ever have that one park that was just a bit run down or kind of shady? That one that had a reputation for being a hangout spot for teenagers and the occasional homeless person? That was the park in my hometown. It was a place that was always avoided, especially after dark, but one night I found myself walking through that park alone. It was late and I had been out with friends, but we had all gone our separate ways. I was walking home, taking a shortcut through the park. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over everything. The swings creaked in the wind, and the shadows seemed to stretch out, reaching for me. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel eyes on me, watching me from the darkness. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling persisted. As I neared the center of the park, I saw a figure standing by the old oak tree. It was tall and gaunt, its eyes burning like coal in the darkness. I froze, unable to move. The figure seemed to be looking right at me, and I could feel the chill of its gaze. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed with fear, but eventually I found the strength to turn and run. I ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back. When I finally reached the edge of the park, I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. I never told anyone about that night, and I never went back to that park. I also never saw that figure again. But I can still feel its gaze, burning into me, a reminder of the darkness that lurks in the shadows. When I was in the 8th grade, I had my first girlfriend, if you could even call her that. Her name was Lily, and she was the prettiest girl in our class. We used to hang out in the park near our school, swinging on the swings and laughing at each other's jokes. It was a beautiful place, full of trees and flowers, with a small pond in the middle where ducks could swim. One day, as we were walking through the park, Lily told me she wanted to show me something. She led me to a part of the park I had never seen before, hidden behind a thick row of bushes. There was a small stone building, covered in moss and vines, with a heavy wooden door that creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and musty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and strange symbols carved into the walls. Lily told me it was an old storage building, abandoned years ago, but there was something about it that made me uneasy. As we explored the building, I started to hear strange noises, like whispers in the dark. Lily laughed it off, saying it was just the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That night, I had a terrible nightmare. I was back in the park, but everything was different. The trees were dead, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, and the pond was filled with dark, murky water. I was alone, and I could feel something following me, something evil. When I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day I went back to the park, but everything was normal. The trees were green, the pond was clear, and there was no sign of the stone building. I told myself I must have imagined it all, but I couldn't forget the fear I felt in that dream. Years passed, and I never went back to that park, but sometimes, late at night, I would hear whispers in the dark, and I knew that whatever was in that stone building was still out there, waiting for me. I know this sounds unbelievable, but please listen. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening walk in the park, but what I experienced that night still haunts me to this day. It was a cool autumn evening, and I decided to take a stroll through the local park to clear my head. The sun had just set, casting an eerie orange glow over the trees, and the air was filled with the sound of rustling leaves. I was alone, or so I thought. As I walked deeper into the path, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the path. It was a man, dressed in dark clothes, with a hood pulled over his head. He was looking at me, but his face was hidden in the shadows. I tried to ignore him and continue walking, but I could feel his eyes following me. As I turned a corner, I heard footsteps behind me. I quickened my pace, but the footsteps only grew louder. I turned around, but the path was empty. I began to run, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I finally reached the park exit, but as I looked back, I saw the man standing there, watching me. His face was still hidden, but I could feel his gaze piercing through me. I ran all the way home, locking the door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man standing in the park, watching me. I never went back to that park again, and to this day, I still don't know who that man was or what he wanted. But I do know one thing. I'll never forget that terrifying night in the park. In my early 20s, I was working some dead-end job in a call center. The one saving grace was the fact that there was a truly beautiful park right outside, and I could at least walk through it and try to decompress during my lunch break. It became my sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the office and the monotony of the job seemed to fade away. One day, as I strolled through the park, I noticed a new addition, a small, ornate gate tucked away in a corner I had never seen before. It was oddly inviting, with intricate carvings that seemed to whisper secrets. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed it open, stepping into a part of the park I didn't know existed. The air felt different here, heavy with the scent of old roses and something else, something almost metallic. The trees were gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, and the path beneath my feet was overgrown with moss and ivy. But what truly caught my attention were the statues, dozens of them, scattered throughout the grove. They were all of people, their faces contorted in expressions of fear and agony. As I walked, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. and the statues seemed to be watching me. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then, I heard a soft whisper behind me. I turned, and then there was no one there. I quickened my pace, eager to leave this strange grove behind me, but the more I walked, the more lost I became. The path seemed to twist and turn, leading me deeper into the grove. Panic began to set in as I realized I was completely disoriented. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the shadows. My heart racing, I ran, the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I could feel something chasing me, its presence hot on my heels. I stumbled out of the grove, back through the gate, and into the familiar part of the park. Gasping for breath, I looked back, but there was no sign of the grove or the statues. It was as if they had never existed. From that day on, I never ventured near that part of the park again, but sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that low growl echoing in my mind. It serves as a chilling reminder of the terror I experienced in the grove that day. When my parents and I moved into a new house when I was 12, we were all excited about the huge city park that was within walking distance to us. It was a sprawling green space, filled with towering trees and winding paths that seemed to lead to endless adventures. My parents were thrilled that I would have such a beautiful place to explore and play, and I couldn't wait to make new friends and create memories in this park. The first few weeks were everything we had hoped for. I spent hours running through the fields, climbing trees, and playing games with the other kids. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice something strange about the park. It seemed to change after dark. At first it was just the little things, shadows that seemed to move on their own, whispers carried on the wind, and the feeling of being watched. I tried to tell my parents about it, but they just laughed and told me it was all in my imagination. But the more time I spent in the park, the more I realized that there was something truly sinister lurking there. The trees seemed to grow taller and darker, the paths twisted and turned in ways they never had before, and the laughter of the other children turned into screams that echoed through the night. One night, as I was walking home from the park, I heard a voice calling my name. I turned around, but there was no one there. The voice grew louder and more insistent, and I started to run, but no matter how fast I ran, the voice kept getting closer and closer. I finally made it home, slamming the door behind me and gasping for breath. My parents rushed to my side, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't find the words to explain what had happened. From that night on, I never went back to the park. My parents tried to convince me that it was all in my head, but I knew better. There was something evil in that park, something that wanted to hurt me, and I would never let it. Years passed, and the park faded into memory, but sometimes, late at night, I would hear a voice calling my name, and I knew that the evil still lurked in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. The house I grew up in was right across from a park, which at first sounds great, but this wasn't necessarily the park you wanted to live across from. It was a sprawling expanse of greenery that seemed to stretch on endlessly, and at the heart of it was a dense, dark forest that whispered secrets even in the brightest of days. Growing up, the park was my playground. I would spend hours there, exploring the nooks and crannies, climbing the gnarled old trees, and splashing in the stream that cut through the heart of the woods. But as I grew older, the park began to change. The trees seemed to loom larger, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The shadows grew longer, and the air grew colder. It was on a particularly dark and stormy night that I first saw the figure. I was sitting in my room, staring out the window at the park, when a flash of lightning illuminated the figure standing at the edge of the forest. It was tall and gaunt, its eyes glowing a baleful red. I blinked, and it was gone. From that night on, strange things began to happen. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and whispers echoed through the halls of my house. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was just my imagination. But then, one night, I woke to find the figure standing at the foot of my bed. Its eyes bored into mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure leaned in closer, and I could smell the stench of decay on its breath. It whispered a single word, "Run," before vanishing into thin air. I didn't need to be told twice. I fled my house, never looking back. To this day, I don't know what happened to the park or the figure that haunted it. All I know is that some places are better left unexplored, and some secrets are better left buried. Back in college, I went geocaching with my friends a few times. It was a fun way to explore the outdoors and solve puzzles together. One particular day, we decided to visit a park that was rumored to have some challenging caches hidden within it. The park was vast and dense with trees, and the paths were winding and overgrown. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew more eerie. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sounds were the rustling of the leaves and the distant chirping of birds. We followed the coordinates to a small clearing, where we found the first cache. It was a small, metal box hidden under a pile of rocks. We signed the logbook and replaced the cache, then continued on our way. As we walked further into the park, the trees grew closer together, and the light grew dimmer. The air was cool and damp, and a sense of unease began to creep over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Eventually we came across a small pond, its surface still and dark. The reflection of the trees and the sky above was perfect, like a mirror. As we approached, a figure emerged from the shadows on the other side of the pond. It was a woman, dressed in a long white gown, her hair long and tangled. She stared at us, her eyes dark and hollow. We froze, unsure of what to do. The woman began to walk towards us, her steps slow and deliberate. She stopped at the edge of the pond, her eyes fixed on us. "Do you want to play a game?" she asked, her voice raspy and hoarse. We were all too scared to respond. The woman smiled, revealing a mouthful of jagged teeth. "I'll make it easy," she said. "If you can find the cache hidden in this park, I'll let you go. If you can't, you'll stay here with me forever." With that, she disappeared back into the shadows. We stood there, frozen in fear, unsure of what to do next. But we knew we had to find the cache, or risk being trapped in this eerie park forever. When we were kids, me and my friends used to play pickup basketball at this one court in a nearby park. It was rather secluded, but we all knew to meet each other there after school, rain or shine. The park itself was old, with overgrown trees and a thick canopy of leaves that blocked out most of the sunlight, even on the brightest of days. One evening, as the sun was setting and the shadows began to stretch out across the ground, we were in the middle of a heated game when we heard a strange rustling coming from the bushes behind the court. We ignored it at first, thinking it was just some small animal, but eventually the rustling grew louder and more insistent. Finally, one of my friends, Mike, decided to go and check it out. He walked over to the bushes and peered inside, but all he could see was darkness. Suddenly, he let out a blood-curdling scream and stumbled backwards, clutching his arm. We all rushed over to see what had happened, and that's when we saw it, a large, black figure with glowing red eyes, standing in the shadows of the bushes. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and its body was covered in thick, matted fur. It let out a low growl and took a step towards us, and we all turned and ran as fast as we could. We never went back to that park again, and to this day, I still get chills whenever I think about what we saw that evening. Some say it was just a bear or a large dog, but I know what I saw. It was something far more sinister, something that shouldn't exist in this world. And I'll never forget the fear in Mike's eyes as he clutched his wounded arm, or the way that creature looked at us with such malice in its glowing red eyes. I used to get pizza at this one place and then walk around a nearby park. When I first moved into the city, I knew no one there, so this kind of became like a ritual I do sometimes after work and on weekends. It was a nice little park, not too big, but it had a few benches and a small pond with ducks. It was my peaceful escape from the bustling city. One evening, after a particularly rough day at work, I decided to go for a walk in the park. The sun was setting, casting an eerie orange glow over everything. I sat down on my usual bench, watching the ducks swim in the pond. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a figure standing near the edge of the pond, wearing a large black coat and wide-brimmed hat. They were just standing there, motionless. I got up to take a closer look, but as soon as I took a step, the figure turned to face me. Their face was almost completely obscured by the hat, but I could feel their eyes on me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure started walking towards me, slowly at first, but then picking up speed. I panicked and started running towards the exit of the park. I could hear footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I didn't dare look back. I kept running until I reached the exit. Then I turned around, expecting to see the figure right behind me, but there was nothing there. The park was completely empty. I never went back to that park after dark again, but sometimes, when I'm walking down the street at night, I swear I can feel someone watching me. And I can't help but wonder if it's the same figure from the park. When I was in 4th or 5th grade, my parents signed me up for this summer nature program. It was actually pretty chill, and I remember most of the days we'd hang out at this nearby park. We usually just walk around and look at plants and animals and stuff. It was a nice way to spend the long, hot summer days, and I enjoyed learning about the environment around us. One day, as we were exploring the park, our guide told us about a local legend. It was about a ghostly figure that roamed the park at night, searching for lost souls. The story was creepy, but we all laughed it off, thinking it was just another campfire tale. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The story had managed to get under my skin, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts of the ghostly figure. The next day, I was distracted and on edge. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the ghostly figure from the legend. My friends noticed my unease and tried to cheer me up, but nothing seemed to help. Then that night I had a dream. I was back in the park, but it was dark and eerie. The ghostly figure was there, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I tried to run, but my feet felt like they were stuck in quicksand. The figure got closer and closer, its icy fingers reaching out towards me. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that the dream was more than just a dream. It felt like the ghostly figure was still out there, watching me. The next day I told my friends about my dream. They laughed it off, saying it was just my imagination running wild. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the legend than just a story. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about the ghostly figure, wondering if it really was out there, waiting for me. Eventually, I decided to go back to the park to see if I could find any evidence of the legend and put my fears to rest. As I walked through the park, the darkness seemed to close in around me. I felt like I was being watched, like something was following me. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling only grew stronger. Then I saw it, a ghostly figure, just like in my dream. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, and I could feel its icy gaze on me. I tried to run, but my feet felt like they were stuck in quicksand again. The figure got closer and closer, its icy fingers reaching out towards me. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. It was just a dream again. But then I looked around, and I realized I was still in the park. It was still dark, and I could still feel the ghostly figure watching me. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was back in my room. I never went to the park at night again, and the ghostly figure haunted my dreams for years to come. I never knew there was a park where graphics cards grew on trees, but just wait until you hear what me and my friends found one day. It was a sunny Saturday morning, and my friends and I decided to explore the new park that had recently opened in our town. The park was massive, with lush green trees and a clear blue lake in the center. We were excited to explore and see what this new park had to offer. As we walked deeper into the park, we stumbled upon a grove of trees that looked different from the others. These trees had leaves that shimmered in the sunlight, and their branches seemed to be made of metal. As we got closer, we realized that these trees were not ordinary trees at all. They were graphics card trees. Each tree had graphics cards hanging from its branches, and they were all the latest models. We couldn't believe our eyes. How was this even possible? We decided to take a closer look, and that's when things took a turn for the worse. As we reached out to touch one of the graphics cards, the tree suddenly came to life. Its branches started to move, and it began to emit a loud, screeching sound. We tried to run, but it was too late. The tree grabbed one of my friends and pulled him into its trunk. We could hear his screams as the tree consumed him. We were horrified, but we knew we had to get out of there. We ran as fast as we could, but the trees were everywhere. They were blocking our path, and their branches were reaching out to grab us. We could hear the screams of our friends as they were taken one by one. Finally, we made it out of the park, but we were the only ones left. The park was a trap, and we had fallen right into it. We never knew there was a park where graphics cards grew on trees, but now we knew the truth, and it was too late. I had to collect and identify wildflowers for this project in 5th grade, and in my usual fashion, I'd waited until the day before it was due. With a heavy sigh, I grabbed my backpack and headed out to the local park, hoping I could find enough variety to impress my teacher. The park was usually bustling with people, but today it was eerily quiet. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease as I began my search. After a while, I found a patch of wildflowers that looked promising. I knelt down and started picking them, carefully placing each one in a plastic bag. That's when I noticed something strange. The flowers seemed to be moving, their petals twitching and fluttering as if they were alive. I shook my head, thinking it was just a trick of the light. As I continued my search, the feeling of being watched intensified. I looked around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. There were just trees and bushes, swaying gently in the breeze. I shrugged it off and kept going. Now it was getting dark, and I knew I should head home soon. I had enough flowers for my project, but something made me linger. I felt drawn to a particular spot, a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. I don't exactly remember why. Maybe I thought there would be more flowers there and I could get a slightly better grade. As I stepped into the clearing, I felt a chill run down my spine. There, in the center of the clearing, was a single flower unlike any I'd ever seen. It was large and black, with petals that seemed to absorb the light around them. I felt a sudden urge to touch it, to feel its velvety softness under my fingers. As my hand reached out, I heard a voice in my head. "Pick it," it whispered. "Take it home, and it will grant you a wish." I hesitated, but the voice was insistent. "Pick it, and all your dreams will come true." I didn't know what came over me, but I found myself reaching for the flower. As soon as my fingers touched it, I felt a jolt of electricity run through my body. The world around me seemed to spin, and when I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the park. I was in a dark, twisted version of the park, where the trees were gnarled and the flowers were black. I tried to run, but my feet were rooted to the ground. I screamed, but no one could hear me. I never did finish my project, and to this day, I can't go near a park without feeling that same sense of dread. I know what's waiting for me in the shadows, and I know it's only a matter of time before it claims me. There was one park near where I lived as a kid that had a truly massive playground. Like, it extended as far as you could see as you were walking towards it from the parking lots. The first time I saw it, I was overwhelmed with excitement. It had everything a kid could dream of: swings, slides, jungle gyms, even a mini zip line. But as the years passed, the playground slowly lost its charm. It became a place of shadows and whispers, a playground of nightmares even. It started with small things, a missing swing here, a broken slide there. Then, one day, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the playground. It was a tall, thin man, dressed in a black suit, his face obscured by the shadows. He just stood there, watching. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off as a trick of the light. But then, other kids started to see him too. They said he would whisper to them, telling them to come closer. Some said he would reach out to them with long, bony fingers. No one ever saw what happened if they got too close. They just disappeared. The playground became a place of fear. Parents stopped bringing their kids there, and soon it was just me and a few other brave souls who dared to venture into the shadows. We would play, but always with one eye on the edge of the playground, where the tall man stood, watching. One day, for some reason I still don't remember, I decided to confront him. I walked right up to him, my heart pounding in my chest. The man didn't move, and he didn't speak. I reached out to touch him, but my hand passed right through him. He was a ghost, a specter of the playground's dark past. I immediately took off running as fast as I could, never looking back. The playground was actually closed down soon after, and no one ever spoke of it again. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still hear the whispers of the children who disappeared, calling out from the shadows of the massive playground. There was a park near me which had a little pond, which ended up being surprisingly deep compared to how deep me and my friends thought it was. Then one beautiful day, the sun was shining and the birds were chirping. My friends and I decided to go for a walk in the park, and as we strolled around, we came across the pond. It looked so inviting, with its clear water sparkling in the sunlight. We decided to dip our feet in and cool off, but as soon as we stepped into the water, we realized something was off. The water was much colder than we expected, and it seemed to be getting deeper the further we walked in. Suddenly, one of my friends lost her footing and slipped under the water. We all rushed to help her, but she was nowhere to be found. The pond was deeper than any of us had imagined. We started to panic, screaming for help and searching for our friend. But it was as if the water had swallowed her whole. There was no sign of her anywhere. We ran back to shore, but the pond seemed to have grown larger, its edges creeping towards us. We tried to run, but our feet were stuck in the mud, the water rising around us. As the sun began to set, the pond grew darker, and we could feel something moving beneath the surface. It was then that we realized we were not alone in the water. There were creatures lurking in the depths, waiting for us. We struggled to free ourselves, but it was too late. The water had claimed us, just like it had claimed our friend. At least, that's what we thought, before we all woke up. I looked around at my friends, including the one we thought had been trapped in the pond, and apparently we all had the same dream. To this day, none of us can explain it, but also from that day on, the park was closed, and the pond was deemed too dangerous to be near. However, every now and then, on a quiet night, you can still hear the screams of something in the water echoing from the depths of the pond. It serves as a chilling reminder of the horrors that lie within.